If you're someone who's on a journey to achieve some meaningful long-term goals and you find yourself stalling out, getting stuck on the path, maybe procrastinating, and just engaging in all different types of self-sabotage that hold you back from achieving those goals, this video is for you. And that's because in this video, I'll be going over my 4-step method for achieving any goal, whether it be a career goal, a creative goal, a relationship goal, or a health goal. And this method is designed to help you work through all of the points of friction, all of the resistance, and all of the bottlenecks that come along on that journey. And you'll want to make sure that you hear every single one of the steps in this method because they all work together as one thing. Now, before we jump into the steps in the method, let's talk about what I mean by journey first. So if you have, let's say your starting point and then you have your end goal that you want to get to, like maybe you want to get a promotion at work, or maybe you want to start your own business, or maybe you want to get into a happy, healthy relationship, or you have some kind of creative project that you are bringing to fruition. You have essentially your start point where you're at now, and then you have your end point, the place that you want to get to. And that journey is going to be something that, if it's a particularly large goal, is going to be something that's probably going to take you to a lot of unexpected places. And so it's not probably going to be just a point A to point B type of thing. It's going to be point A to point L to point C, and then over to point Y, and then back to point A again. And so your journey is probably going to take a lot of twists and turns if it is a big enough goal. And as you're walking that labyrinthian journey towards your big goal, what's going to happen is that invariably you're going to run into friction along the way. And so we can almost think about these friction points or resistance points or bottlenecks as a sort of threshold that has to be crossed over in order for you to get to the next step on your journey. And let's say that these thresholds are guarded by threshold guardians. And those threshold guardians will require you to make changes and to meet certain needs and to do certain things in order for them to allow you past that threshold. For example, just for context, I've had my other YouTube channel, The Diamond Net, for over 10 years. And I was on that journey, and the journey was going very smoothly for the first 5 years of it. And then I just ran into this block. It was like running into this threshold guardian. And I was just stuck there, and I was procrastinating, I was stalling out. Whenever it was time to do work, other than the bare minimum things that I would have to do, I would be hiding underneath the covers, and I would just feel so incredibly overwhelmed. And at first I resisted this. I just tried to go past the threshold guardian. I tried to push my way past that barrier, and it just didn't work. I just kept stalling out at that point in the journey. And what I didn't know at the time was that that threshold guardian was asking something very specific of me. You see, the way that I was thinking about my goals at the time were expansive beyond what it was that I really wanted to take on as a responsibility, because I'd be thinking about my goals as like, oh, I'm going to put my work out there and I'm going to save the world. And I just felt this extreme sense of responsibility for everything, which was inspiring when I would fantasize about it, but then it would be paralyzing at the same time. And I just wouldn't want to do the work. And so in order for me to get past that threshold guardian, I actually had to narrow the scope of impact to people that I knew that I could have a direct impact on, people who could really benefit, in their own personal lives. And so instead of thinking about it as like I'm this hero that has to come in and save the day, it's like, oh, I want to empower other people to save the day. And it's not just me alone in this. And so once I shifted that mindset, that threshold guardian allowed me past the threshold. And so that's an example of a type of threshold you can run into along your journey towards your big goals. And you will probably run into 10, 20, or 30 of these thresholds. And once you understand what that part of you is asking, you can actually meet the needs of that threshold guardian, and it will allow you to pass so that you can move forward on your journey towards your big goals. So let's get right into this 4-step method, and you can think about each of these different methods as like a bag of tricks that work together to help you work through those areas of friction and those bottlenecks along your journey when you're self-sabotaging, when you're procrastinating, when you're holding yourself back. So the very first step in the method, and it's the foundational step in the method, is to be able to know what it is that you really want and to bring your goals and your vision into alignment with what it is that you want. And so much of the friction, the self-sabotage, and the procrastination during these journeys comes from misalignment with what it is that you really want. And I call this your truest, deepest will, what it is that you really want in your heart of hearts. And this can be the goal itself is either partially or wholly misaligned from what it is that you want, or it could be the case that it is the way that you're going about achieving this goal, or the way that you're even thinking about this goal is misaligned. And the question, what do I really want, can seem like a very simple question, but oftentimes it's a very difficult question to answer in the deepest way, in the way that actually aligns with your truest, deepest will. Because we have all kinds of ideas in our head about, oh, maybe I should want this, or maybe I shouldn't want that. Or sometimes we'll be focused on wanting what is actually a means to another end. So for example, it might be like, oh, I really want all of this money over here. But really, money is always a means to another end, unless you're a coin collector. And so let's say if you're like really focused on money, you want to think about, okay, what does the money actually get for you? Then it can tell you a little bit more about what you really want. Or let's say if we're dealing with shame, all we can really want is to get away from shame. Or if we're dealing with overwhelm, all we can really want is to get away from overwhelm. And so by moving away from things that we don't want, we actually lose sight of what it is that we do want, because it's very different to go towards what we want compared to going away from what it is that we don't want. Also, our identity and worldview beliefs can put blocks in the way to knowing what it is that we want. So for example, if like deep down what I really want in my heart of hearts is to do something creative, but in my mind, my worldview is that creative people are stupid, and then I've always been told that, and so I built my identity into being this no-nonsense person who's never creative, then that's going to be really difficult for me to become aware of what it is that I want if it goes against what it is that I think I should want, or what my identity says about me, or what my worldview even considers good. And along these same lines, we can even go unconscious to what it is that we want, because we're afraid that if we actually admitted that we wanted that thing, or we let ourselves know these things about ourselves, that our social group would reject us or exile us. Or let's say if we've gotten really used to operating off of external cues, like, oh, what do I have to do? What should I do? What does my boss expect me to do? What do my friends expect me to do? What do my parents expect me to do? If we get so used to operating that way, we will lose sight of the answer to the question, what do I really want? And so you see, there can be so many different layers of insulation between your conscious mind and your truest, deepest will. So actually knowing what it is that you really truly want might take a lot of soul searching. And so this first step is the foundational step in the process, but it is also the most difficult step in the process. But one of the things that you can do to help you become aware of your truest, deepest will, and to start bringing your goals more into alignment with it, and to start bringing the way that you approach those goals more into alignment with it, you can start asking yourself the question, instead of what do I want to do, ask yourself, how do I want to feel? And so being able to name off your favorite feeling states in the positive, not feeling states that are the opposite of trying to go away from negative states, but really feeling states that you just enjoy in and of themselves because they're enjoyable. For example, let's say that I just really enjoy the feeling state of wonder, and it's not about going away from some other negative feeling, I just love feeling a sense of wonder. But let's say that I was just trying to get away from some other feeling. Like, let's say I was saying I like wonder, but I'm really just trying to get away from boredom, and wonder makes me feel something that gets away from boredom. In that case, that's not going to be aligned with my truest, deepest will. Instead, that's just going to show me what I want to move away from. And our truest, deepest will, what it is that we really want, doesn't have to do with what we want to go away from. It has to do with what it is that we want to go toward and how it is that we want to feel. All right, so that was step one of the method, and that has to do with bringing your goals and your actions into alignment with your truest, deepest will in terms of what it is that you want to achieve, as well as how it is that you're going about achieving it. And if it's the case that you run into a sticking point, a threshold guardian on your path that's not letting you pass, think about what needs to be tweaked. Do you need to change something about your goals, or do you need to change something about the way you're thinking about your goals or approaching your goals? Now, step two in this method is to work with your own hardware. One of the things that's important to note here is that everybody has their own natural motivational rhythm, and everyone has their own natural working style. And so a method of productivity that works for one person may not work for another person. And so while you're on your journey toward your big goals, oftentimes you can stall out on that journey if you are trying to bend your elbow in the wrong direction and you're trying to make yourself operate in a way that you don't naturally operate. So a while back, I was working with a client who's a more intuitive worker naturally, but they're an entrepreneur and they were looking around at other entrepreneurs that they know personally who are very successful, who are very systematic workers. So these entrepreneurs would have a tendency to map their schedule out, like scheduling everything out. Okay, this 30-minute chunk is going to be to this 1 hour long chunk is going to be to that. And so basically being like very, very time oriented with how they write out their schedule. And so what my client was trying to do the same thing. And so he would write out this really extensive schedule for himself, but every single time he would just rebel from his schedule. He would just do something else instead. So what I recommended to him instead is, instead of trying to put a square peg in a round hole and to try to make himself fit to this other type of working style, to work with his more natural task-oriented working style where he's got just a to-do list and it's not all scheduled out, and he works intuitively with the tasks on his to-do list. And that worked so much better for him. He was able to get a lot more done that way. And this isn't the only time that I've seen that happen. I've had many clients come in and their way of operating is just so very different from the way that they're trying to operate. And instead of leaning into their zone of genius and leaning into the way that they naturally work, which is their superpower, they are like trying to fix their own superpower and try to operate through a different way of motivation that doesn't really work for them. And everyone's natural motivational rhythm is going to be a bit different. Everyone's natural working style is going to be a bit different. But I'm going to ask you a few questions here that will help you narrow it down and get a little bit more clear about the way you naturally work. So my first question is, are you a more intuitive worker or are you a more systematic worker? Somebody who's an intuitive worker tends to be more task-oriented and tends to just want to, like, let's say, not be so time-bounded and to just work on the task at hand, just working toward completion. Whereas somebody who's really systematic probably wants a more mapped out schedule, wants very specific appointment times during the day where it's like, okay, during this time, I'm going to be doing this thing. And when this hour comes, that's when I'm going to stop and I'm going to start doing this other thing. Another question you can ask yourself is, am I more of a collaborative worker or am I more of a solitary worker? So if you're collaborative, you like to work with other people and like to have a lot of feedback and to ping pong ideas off of one another. But if you're a solitary worker, you're someone who wants more control over the end product and you like to get really deeply into the work itself. And it's the conversation with the work itself as opposed to being the collaboration happening with other people that really excites you. You can also ask yourself, am I a more type A worker or a more type B worker? So type A workers tend to have a lot of activation energy to do tasks. And so they tend to just be sort of natural workhorses. Whereas, like, let's say a type B worker tends to be more like, let's say, chilled out, laid back, and they need a lower activation energy to enter into work. Like, I'm a more type B worker and I like to have more of a flow throughout my day between relaxation and work. And I like to have very little distinction between work and play because that way it's like it all just kind of blends in together and I don't have to use a lot of activation energy to get myself going because that's just not something that comes very naturally to me. And so these are just a few questions that you can ask yourself to start to understand your hardware a little bit better. But to give an analogy here of what you're really trying to do is you're basically operating like an animal tamer would to a particular type of animal. And so you need to discover what type of animal you actually are. And then there's also specificity within that. So for example, if I'm a lion tamer and I'm working with two different lions, it's like I'm going to need to know a lot about lions in general in a way that's going to apply to both of those lions that I'm working with, but I need to know them personally as well. Like maybe this lion prefers this and that lion prefers that. And so if I want the lions to cooperate me with as the tamer, I actually have to work with their nature, their collective nature and their individual nature. So you have to understand who you are as a human being, who you are as a physical entity, as a biological organism, but you also have to understand yourself as a personality. And and you have to work directly with your natural strengths, your natural energy levels, your natural instincts, basically. So it's channeling those elements of your nature into your work instead of trying to fight those and trying to make yourself into a totally different animal. Now, just really quick, if this video is resonating with you so far and you want to learn more about how to overcome procrastination and self-sabotage so that you can finally achieve your goals, I highly recommend checking out my free webinar, 3 Shadow Work Secrets to Get Out of Your Own Way and Reach Your Full Potential Without Having to Fight Yourself, and the link is down below in the description box. Also, if you would like to work with me one-on-one, then I have a link down below in the description box for an application as well. All right, so for those first 2 steps in the method, both of those have to do with alignment. The first one is alignment with what it is that you want to do and how it is that you want to approach what it is that you want to do. And the second one is working with your natural hardware, working with your own instincts, your own body, your own nature, so that you can, let's say, channel your natural working rhythm into your work. So both of those have to do with alignment. Now, this next step in the method has to do with other types of blocks that can come up along the way. So we will end up being blocked if we're out of alignment with our own nature, if we're out of alignment with what we want or the way that we want to approach those things. That will cause us to run into friction along the path. We'll run into a threshold guardian that won't let us pass. But if it's the case that we are perfectly aligned and we are working with our natural rhythm, then we want to look to these other reasons for those blocks. So this step is all about working through non-alignment based blocks on the path. And there are 4 main non-alignment based blocks on the path. So the first one is limiting beliefs and mindsets. The second one is about uncomfortable feeling states, and then you're trying to avoid those uncomfortable feeling states by blocking your way on the path. The third one is a lack of self-trust, causing you to rebel from your own goals. And the fourth one is unmet needs. And so maybe you have your needs met in the current situation, but if you actually move forward on your goals, either in the pursuit or the achievement of those goals, it would sacrifice one of those needs. And another potential reason, kind of a half reason sometimes, is if you're missing certain external information. So sometimes you'll get hung up on the path because you just need some kind of core information that you don't have yet. So I'm going to give you some examples for each of these types of blocks along the path. So let's go into limiting beliefs first. And an example that I have is one from my own life. So for many years, I struggled to stay consistent with diet and exercise because I had this belief that was there that's like, okay, I have to do it 100% every single day. And if I even fall off one day, then that means that I've totally ruined it. And then it's like, I've already fallen off the wagon. I messed it up already. And then what would happen is I'd fall off the wagon for a month and I'd get back on track and I would just repeat this same cycle over and over again. So I had this belief that was there lingering under the surface that if I don't do it perfectly, then I've already failed. And what I had to shift my mindset to is to understand that imperfection is part of the process and that there's going to be ebbs and flows within the journey. And I'm not going to have everything the same way every single day because I know that that just doesn't fit with the way my hardware works. And now what I focus on instead is just making sure that I have something that's easy and that is sort of self-reinforcing and that I don't have to try with every single day. And also to be a bit more kind with myself. So if I fall off the wagon, it's not like, oh no, I already failed. It's like, okay, well, let's just get back on tomorrow. Now, the second non-alignment based blocker that can show up on your path and that can act as a threshold guardian is certain unwanted or uncomfortable feeling states. And these can either be ones that you know that you're consciously trying to avoid or ones that you're not aware that you're trying to avoid. So let's say, for example, that Johnny wants a promotion at work, but he finds himself tripping at the finish line all of the time, always last minute. He always sabotages himself. And consciously, when he thinks about that promotion, he just gets really excited. And so he doesn't necessarily know that he's trying to avoid some kind of uncomfortable feeling. But what's actually going on there is that when Johnny was a child, he was expected to take on too much adult responsibility too young, and he felt very overwhelmed by that. And now when part of him imagines, like let's say the expansion in responsibility and power that comes with the promotion and gets excited, there's another part of him that feels incredibly overwhelmed. And that's the part of him that tries to hold him back. And if we could think about that part of him that's trying to avoid overwhelm as that threshold guardian holding him back on the path, that aspect of him probably needs something from him in order to allow him to pass. And it might be the case that Johnny might need to create better internal boundaries and more of an ability to say no. So Johnny might just have a tendency to take on tons and tons of responsibility and internalize all sorts of responsibilities that aren't his already from the get-go. And so without those boundaries, it's only his limitation and station and power that's keeping him from expanding his responsibility to an overwhelming level. And so that part of him is holding him back because he doesn't yet have those internal boundaries to say, I'm going to take on this thing and not that thing. Or I'm not going to let this impact me in a certain way. I'm not going to feel responsible for that person's feeling state because that's outside of my control. But once Johnny shifts his mindset and develops those internal boundaries so that he doesn't feel overwhelmed by responsibility because he knows how to both take power and give power back to other people, take responsibility for what's his and leave responsibility that isn't his off of his plate, once he develops that ability, then he's going to feel much safer and more comfortable expanding in his career. Now, the third non-alignment based reason is a lack of self-trust. And so when that's the case, our conscious mind will create certain goals and plans, and then other parts of ourself will rebel from them because those parts weren't taken into consideration. For example, one that I ran into, I guess this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago at this point, a friend and I were going to start a podcast where we would share a little bit more of our personal lives and things like that. And I have always had a value of transparency. And so consciously I was like, oh yeah, I would love to go online and I would love to be more transparent about, let's say things that happened earlier on in life. And there's a part of me that really wanted to share those things. But the reality is that I actually have a privacy boundary there. I don't want to share all of that actually online. And I wasn't really aware of that privacy boundary because I kind of saw transparency as an unquestioned good. And I saw privacy more like secrecy, like, oh, why are you not being perfectly transparent? Are you trying to hide something? And so what ended up happening is that when I actually met him to record our first podcast, I found myself just stopped in my tracks. Like I could not speak. Like I would try to express something, but just no words would come out. And mind you, at this point in time, I had already been on the internet with an audience for like 4 or 5 years. Like I was used to, talking in front of people all the time, but I just totally clammed up. And that's because part of me, the conscious mind, was trying to move forward towards this goal of like sharing more of myself and maybe that being another lens through which to share my insights. And this other part of me that's like, whoa, that's totally over our privacy boundaries. And so with that, I experienced this internal self-rebellion. And so if I think about this, it's almost like if you can imagine there was a threshold guardian on the path and it was saying, no, you can't go through this threshold because there's actually a boundary there and I need to be able to trust you that you're not going to try to go over these boundaries for me to let you actually move forward in other areas. And so becoming trustworthy to yourself, honoring your boundaries, honoring your wants, honoring your needs, tuning into yourself is absolutely necessary to let go of the friction along your path toward your big goals. And sometimes you will run into a hard boundary that you have, and you have to be able to shift your mindset. You have to be able to explore it and understand it and really honor those boundaries. Otherwise, that part of you will hold you back in certain ways because it doesn't want its boundaries gone over. Now, the fourth non-alignment based boundary to pursuing and achieving your goals is unmet needs. So let's say that you're getting your needs met in the status quo, but if you continue to move in the direction of your vision, of your goals, what's going to happen is that part of you knows that you're going to sacrifice that need. So the example that I like to go to with this is, let's say that Sarah wants to start her own business and she wants to become a solopreneur. And ultimately, Sarah maybe conceptualizes of herself as a bit of a loner. She doesn't really trust people. She doesn't really feel like she needs people. That's the way that she kind of thinks about things. But right now, she doesn't make a lot of money. And because she doesn't make a lot of money, she's having to live with roommates, she's having to carpool to work, she's having to do her laundry in a public laundromat, and she's having to work a job that she really doesn't like that happens to work with a lot of other coworkers. And so right now in the status quo, Sarah is, let's say, passively meeting her connection needs, right? So she's got a lot of people in her life because she doesn't have a lot of money, but she would prefer to be more alone, but also to be able to like have enough money to live by herself and to have her own car and to have her own washer and dryer and to have a more aligned career path where she's a solopreneur. But because consciously she values solitude, but there's a part of her that knows that she needs connection, that part of her is going to hold her back on the journey and act as a threshold guardian that's not going to allow her to move forward with her goal of being a solopreneur until she consciously and deliberately incorporates her connection needs into her goals. And so she would have to sort of question her ideas around being a loner, or like, let's say she would actually have to think about like, okay, not only am I going to be a solopreneur, here are going to be the different social outlets that I'm going to have to being able to build out my social support system for myself. And once she does that, the threshold guardian should allow her to pass so that she can actually go forward and achieve her goal of becoming a solopreneur. And so those are some examples of some non-alignment based threshold guardians that can come up along the journey towards your big goals. And those are some of the ways that you can start to resolve those. And again, as a recap, you can have, let's say, limiting beliefs that hold you back on your journey, that you would have to shift your beliefs about yourself or about reality in general in order to get that threshold guardian to allow you past. Then the second non-alignment based blocker is where you're trying to avoid certain uncomfortable or painful feeling states by holding yourself back. And so a threshold guardian pops up on your path to keep you from experiencing situations that might bring up those feelings again. And the third non-alignment based block on your path has to do with a lack of self-trust. And so for that, you would need to actually earn your own trust by being able to understand what your needs and boundaries are and really attuning to yourself and meeting them so that those other parts of you know that they can trust your mind, your executive function, to make good decisions for you on the whole. And then the fourth is making sure that all of your needs are met. You can run into a block because you're getting your needs met in the status quo, but won't get your needs met if you actually get to your goal or you continue to pursue your goal. And so meeting those needs and making plans to meet those needs allows that threshold guardian to let you pass. And so that's step 3 of the method. So basically what we have so far is we have step 1, make sure that your goal is in alignment with your truest, deepest will, as well as the way that you're trying to achieve that goal. Step 2 is to make sure that you're aligned with your natural hardware. Make sure that you're aligned with your natural working rhythm and your natural motivational style. And then the third step in the method is to work through your non-alignment based blocks to your goals, your limiting beliefs, your feeling states that you're trying to avoid feeling, your lack of self-trust, and not meeting your needs. Now the fourth step in this method, and this step has to be with you every single step of the way as you go, is to put forth aligned effort towards your goals. So you actually have to take action. And don't get caught up in the procrastination spiral of, oh, I need to make sure everything's aligned first before I take the first step. Ultimately, you're going to find alignment and you're going to work through your goals while you're taking action. And so let's say that your goal off in the future is a journey of 1,000 steps, and maybe it's the case that you're not even perfectly clear about what the goal is yet. Well, you still want to take those first steps. And so what you do is you start walking 10 steps, and then you might run into a block, and then you work through that block using the other 3 methods in this process. And then as you work through that threshold, you continue to take action, or even while you're struggling with that threshold, you continue to take action elsewhere. So action is in every single step along your journey. Bearing in mind, you also need to rest and you also need to take time to really connect with yourself and to really check in to make sure that you're still aligned with everything, but make sure that you're not using the other parts of this process to hold you back from moving forward. And action-wise, you want to find yourself processes and systems and techniques and just ways of approaching your work that really work with you and that really feel, like, let's say, they're not going to be overly exhausting or you're not having to push yourself way out of alignment with your nature to do them. Now, what I recommend is for you to bookmark this video so you can keep coming back to it whenever you run into snags along your journey, so that you can use this bag of tricks in order to get yourself past those threshold guardians. But if you wanted to work on the absolute foundation of this process and you want to understand more about your truest, deepest will and how to discover what it is that you really want, I highly recommend checking out this video right here.